When my son got married, I didn't mention the $28 million fortune I'm hiding. And thank God I did, because a week later my daughter-in-law showed up with a power of attorney and a lawyer. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have trusted my gut. Standing there in St. Mary's Cathedral, watching my son Patrick exchange vows with a woman he'd known for barely 8 months, something felt wrong. Not the kind of wrong you feel when your child grows up too fast, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. Riley looked stunning in her white dress, I'll give her that. Blonde hair swept up in an elegant bun, blue eyes that sparkled just right in the church lighting. She was 32 to Patrick's 35, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that usually comes with age and experience. Maybe too much experience. "Do you, Riley Elizabeth Morrison, take this man?" the priest continued, but I found myself studying her face instead of listening to the ceremony. There was something calculated about the way she smiled, the way she held Patrick's hands just a little too tightly, like she was claiming ownership rather than making a promise. Patrick, on the other hand, looked like a man in a dream. My boy had always been trusting, maybe too trusting. After his divorce 3 years ago, he'd been cautious about dating. Then Riley appeared at his office Christmas party last December, and suddenly he was talking about soulmates and destiny. 8 months later, here we were. The first time Patrick brought her home for dinner, she spent more time asking questions about me than talking about herself. "Your father seems so independent for his age," she'd said to Patrick while I was clearing dishes. "Does he manage all his affairs by himself? Banking, investments, that sort of thing?" I'd brushed it off then. Lots of people were curious about elderly relatives, especially when considering marriage into the family. But the questions kept coming, visit after visit. Always casual, always friendly, but always probing. "Philip, you live in this big house all by yourself?" she'd asked during their third visit, walking through my 4-bedroom colonial like she was taking inventory. "It must be expensive to maintain. Do you have help with the finances?" "I manage just fine," I'd answered, but I caught her eyes lingering on details. The crown molding I'd had restored last year. The hardwood floors I'd refinished. The artwork on the walls that I'd collected over decades of careful investing. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that those small details were nothing compared to what I'd really built. $28 million, carefully accumulated over 40 years of smart investments and even smarter saving. Money that sat in accounts spread across 3 different banks, managed by a financial advisor who'd never met my family and never would. I'd learned to keep money secret the hard way. My late wife Martha had a sister who'd bled our savings dry during Martha's cancer treatments, promising to help with medical expenses while secretly funding her gambling addiction. After Martha died and I discovered what had happened, I swore I'd never let anyone have that kind of access to my resources again. So when Riley started her gentle fishing expeditions, I gave her exactly what she was looking for. The image of a comfortable but not wealthy widower. Someone worth investigating, but not worth the major effort. "I pronounce you husband and wife," the priest announced, and Patrick kissed his new bride while the congregation applauded. Riley's smile was radiant, but when she caught my eye over Patrick's shoulder, something flickered there. Satisfaction, maybe, or triumph. The reception was held at the Marriott downtown, nothing too fancy, but nice enough to make an impression. Riley had insisted on paying for half, which surprised me at the time. Most brides I knew wanted their families to handle the expenses, but Riley was adamant about contributing. "I believe in equal partnerships," she'd told Patrick with that bright smile of hers. I watched her work the room during the dinner. She knew exactly who to talk to, exactly what questions to ask. When she spoke with my neighbor Harold, a retired bank manager, she steered the conversation toward estate planning. With my old colleague Jim from the electrical company, she discussed property values in our neighborhood. "Your father-in-law seems like such a practical man," I overheard her telling Patrick's college friend Mike. "I bet he's got everything organized perfectly. Wills, insurance policies, all that important paperwork." Mike had laughed. "Philip?" "Yeah, he's always been on top of things. Smart with money too, from what Patrick's told me." Riley's eyes had brightened at that, and she'd asked several more questions about my money management skills before moving on to the next group of guests. During the father-son dance tradition, Patrick pulled me aside. "Dad, I know this happened fast, but Riley's amazing. She's already talking about taking care of you as you get older, having family nearby, making sure you're not lonely." "I'm only 63, son. I think I've got a few good years left." "Of course you do, but it's nice to know Riley cares about family. She's already asking about your routine, your doctor appointments, stuff like that. She wants to make sure you're eating well, staying healthy." My blood ran a little cold. Since when was my health any of her business? "What kind of questions?" "Nothing weird, just, do you take any medications? Do you have a regular doctor? That sort of thing." She used to work in healthcare before she got into real estate, so she notices these things. Healthcare. Riley had told us she worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company. When had that story changed to healthcare? And why was my new daughter-in-law suddenly so interested in my medical information? "Patrick," I said carefully, "how much have you told Riley about my finances?" He shrugged. "Just that you're comfortable." "Why?" "No reason. Just curious." But it wasn't no reason. It was every reason in the world. As the evening wound down and guests started leaving, Riley approached me near the coat check. She was still in her wedding dress, but something about her demeanor had shifted. Less blushing bride, more focused businesswoman. "Philip, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for Patrick over the years. Raising him alone after Martha passed couldn't have been easy. We managed fine. I'm sure you did, but now you don't have to manage alone anymore." She placed a hand on my arm, her grip firmer than necessary. "I want you to know that Patrick and I are here for you now. Whatever you need, however we can help." "Help with what?" "Well, you're getting older. Things get complicated. Bills, paperwork, important decisions. It's a lot for one person to handle." Her smile was warm, but her eyes were cold as January. "I have experience with these things, helping elderly family members navigate their finances, make sure everything's in order." "I appreciate the concern, Riley, but I'm quite capable of handling my own affairs." "Of course you are. I just meant that if you ever need anything, we're here. Patrick loves you so much, and I love Patrick, so that makes you family to me too." She squeezed my arm again before walking away to find Patrick, leaving me standing there with a distinct feeling that I'd just been issued a warning disguised as an offer of help. That night, driving home to my empty house, I couldn't shake the conversation. Riley's questions over the past months, her sudden interest in my health and finances, the way she'd positioned herself as my future caretaker. All of it felt calculated, purposeful. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, staring at my house. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, sitting on 3 acres of prime Connecticut real estate. Worth maybe $600,000 according to recent comparable sales. A nice inheritance for Patrick, certainly, but nothing that would justify the kind of attention Riley had been paying to my affairs, unless she suspected there was more. I'd been careful, so careful, to maintain the appearance of modest comfort. I drove a 5-year-old Honda, shopped at regular grocery stores, lived simply. But maybe I hadn't been careful enough. Maybe someone with the right experience, someone who knew what to look for, could see through the facade. As I unlocked my front door and stepped into the quiet house, one thought kept echoing in my mind. Riley Morrison was hunting, and she thought she'd found her prey. I just hoped she didn't know how wrong she was about who was really in control of this game. The knock at my door came exactly 1 week after the wedding, on a Tuesday morning while I was having my coffee and reading the newspaper. Through the front window, I could see Riley's silver BMW in my driveway, and beside it, a black sedan I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped before I even opened the door. Riley stood on my porch wearing a navy business suit and a serious expression that was nothing like the bubbly bride from 7 days earlier. Behind her was a tall man in his 50s, carrying a leather briefcase and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Philip, good morning," Riley said, her voice crisp and professional. "I hope we're not interrupting anything important. This is David Holbrook. He's an attorney specializing in elder law. We need to discuss some important matters regarding your welfare." I kept my hand on the doorknob, not inviting them in. "My welfare seems to be doing just fine, thank you." "Philip, please," she said, and for the first time I heard impatience creep into her voice. "Patrick is very concerned about you. We all are." Concerned about what exactly? The lawyer stepped forward, offering what I assumed was meant to be a reassuring smile. Mr. Phillips, I'm David Holbrook. Your daughter-in-law has shared some concerning observations about your recent behavior, and we think it would be beneficial to discuss some preventive measures. Preventive measures for what? Riley sighed, like I was being deliberately difficult. Philip, may we please come in? This isn't the kind of conversation we should have on your front porch. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let them into my living room. Riley perched on the edge of my sofa like she owned the place, while Holbrook remained standing, briefcase in hand. Patrick couldn't be here today because he had an important client meeting, Riley began. But he asked me to handle this situation. He's been losing sleep over some things he's noticed. What things? She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook, consulting it like she was reading from a script. Well, for instance, last week when we had dinner here, you forgot you'd already paid the electric bill and wrote out another check. And you mentioned scheduling a dentist appointment 3 times in the same conversation. I stared at her. Those things had never happened. I think you're mistaken. Philip, I understand this is difficult to hear, but Patrick has noticed other incidents too. You've been forgetting names of people you've known for years. Last month you called him at 2 in the morning because you couldn't remember if you'd locked the front door. Every word was a lie, and she was delivering them with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this performance. I've never called Patrick at 2 in the morning about anything. You probably don't remember? Riley said gently, like she was talking to a confused child. That's part of what we're dealing with here. Holbrook opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Mr. Phillips, what we're suggesting is a simple precautionary measure. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would change your daily routine. Just some basic protections in case your condition progresses. My condition? Age-related cognitive decline, Riley said matter-of-factly. It's very common, Philip, nothing to be ashamed of, but it does mean we need to put certain safeguards in place. I felt like I was watching a magic show where I couldn't figure out the trick. What kind of safeguards? Holbrook placed the folder on my coffee table and opened it to reveal several legal documents. A limited power of attorney, giving your son and daughter-in-law the ability to help with financial decisions if needed. Healthcare directives ensuring you get proper medical attention. Very standard documents for someone in your situation. Someone in my situation, I repeated slowly. A widower in his mid-60s living alone, showing early signs of memory issues, Riley explained as if she was being helpful. Patrick loves you too much to watch you struggle with confusion about bills and important decisions. The audacity was breathtaking. She was sitting in my living room, spinning a complete fiction about my mental health, and expecting me to sign away my financial autonomy based on her lies. I'm not signing anything, I said. Riley's mask slipped for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something cold underneath. Then the concerned expression was back. Philip, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Patrick is so worried about you. Then Patrick can come talk to me himself. He tried, she said, her voice getting sharper. He's been trying for months, but you keep insisting everything is fine when it clearly isn't. Holbrook cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss the medical assessment option. Medical assessment? I asked. Riley nodded enthusiastically. We've arranged for Dr. Morrison, no relation, just a coincidence, to evaluate your cognitive function. He specializes in age-related mental decline. Very compassionate, very understanding. You've already arranged it? Well, Patrick was so concerned, and Dr. Morrison had an opening this Friday. Nothing invasive, just some simple tests to establish a baseline. For your own protection. I looked at the documents spread across my coffee table, then at these 2 strangers in my living room planning out my future like I wasn't even there. And if I refuse? Holbrook and Riley exchanged a look. Philip, he said carefully, there are legal mechanisms in place to protect elderly individuals who may not be capable of making sound decisions about their own welfare. The threat was clear, even wrapped in legal language. Submit to their evaluation or face involuntary commitment proceedings. How long have you been planning this? I asked Riley. She blinked innocently. Planning what? This. whole setup. The medical assessment, the lawyer, the power of attorney documents. This doesn't happen overnight. We're just trying to help, family, she said, but something flickered in her eyes. Patrick has been concerned for weeks. Weeks, I repeated. Interesting timeline. Holbrook started gathering his papers. Mr. Phillips, I'll leave these documents for you to review. The healthcare directive is particularly important. It ensures that if something happens to you, your family can make medical decisions on your behalf. Something like what? Accidents, sudden illness, emergency situations where you might not be conscious or capable of communicating your wishes, Riley said smoothly. Very standard planning for someone your age. After they left, I sat in my living room staring at the folder they'd left behind. The power of attorney document was indeed comprehensive, giving Patrick and Riley joint control over my bank accounts, property decisions, and healthcare choices. It was designed to look protective, but it was actually a complete transfer of control. I picked up my phone and called Patrick's office. His secretary told me he was in meetings all day and couldn't be disturbed. I tried his cell phone, straight to voicemail. That afternoon I drove to Patrick's office building and waited in the parking lot. At 6:30 I saw him walking toward his car and called out to him. Dad, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you about Riley's visit this morning. His expression shifted, becoming guarded. She told me she was going to stop by. Patrick, she brought a lawyer. She's claiming I have memory problems, that you're concerned about my mental health. None of that is true. He sighed, looking uncomfortable. Dad, maybe we should go somewhere private to talk about this. I'm talking about it now. Have you been telling Riley that I'm forgetful? That I call you in the middle of the night? You have seemed a little off lately. Riley noticed it too. She's just trying to help. Off how? I don't know, just different. Less sharp than usual. And you did call me late that night about the door locks. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised, this person I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. Patrick, I have never called you about door locks. Not once in my entire life. Dad, you probably just don't remember. I remember everything, Patrick. Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction I've had with you in the past year. What I don't remember is becoming the confused old man that Riley seems to think I am. Patrick looked away, and I realized with growing horror that he genuinely believed what he was saying. Either he was lying to my face, or Riley had somehow convinced him that these fictional incidents had actually occurred. Son, listen to me very carefully. I am not having memory problems. I am not confused about my finances or my health. I do not need a power of attorney or a medical evaluation. What I need is for you to tell me why your wife of 7 days is trying to gain legal control over my life. She's not trying to control anything, Dad. She's trying to protect you. From what? From making mistakes that could hurt you later. From people who might take advantage of an elderly man living alone. From yourself, if things get worse. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but it was clear that Patrick had already made up his mind. Riley had planted seeds of doubt about my mental capacity, and he'd accepted her version of reality over his own observations. As I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I understood what was happening. Riley wasn't just after my money, she was systematically positioning herself as my caretaker, creating a narrative of decline and confusion that would justify taking control of my affairs. The terrifying part was how good she was at it. If she could convince Patrick, my own son, that I was becoming incompetent, what chance did I have against a coordinated effort to paint me as a confused old man who needed to be managed? That night I called my financial advisor from my personal cell phone. Tom, I need to make some changes to my accounts. Nothing dramatic, just some additional security measures. Of course, Philip. What did you have in mind? I'll be in your office first thing tomorrow morning. And Tom, this conversation stays between us. Riley thought she was closing a trap around a helpless old man. What she didn't realize was that she'd just declared war on someone who'd been protecting assets longer than she'd been alive. The game was just beginning. The next morning, I was at Tom Brennan's office by 8 o'clock sharp. Tom had been managing my investments for 12 years, ever since Martha's death forced me to take a more active role in our finances. He was discreet, professional, and most importantly, he understood the value of privacy. "Philip, good to see you," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his mahogany desk. "You sounded concerned on the phone last night. I need to make some changes to my account structures. Someone is trying to gain access to my finances through legal manipulation." Tom's eyebrows rose. "A family member? My new daughter-in-law. She's convinced my son that I'm developing memory problems and need financial oversight. Yesterday she showed up with a lawyer and power of attorney documents. 'And are you having memory problems?' I looked him directly in the eye. 'Tom, do I seem confused or incompetent to you?' He smiled grimly. 'Philip, you remember details about investments from 5 years ago that I have to look up in my files. Your mind is sharp as ever.' That's what I thought. So here's what I need. I want the majority of my assets moved into accounts that require multiple forms of verification to access. Biometric security, personal appearance requirements, whatever it takes to make them lawyer-proof. How much are we talking about? Everything except about $200,000. I want to keep enough visible to satisfy their curiosity, but the rest needs to disappear from any normal financial investigation." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "We can set up several offshore accounts through legitimate channels. Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Luxembourg, all perfectly legal but nearly impossible to discover without knowing exactly where to look." "Do it." As Tom began pulling up account information on his computer, I thought about what else I needed to protect. The house was paid off, but it was in my name alone. My car was nothing special. The real treasure was the $28 million in stocks, bonds, and cash investments that I'd accumulated over 4 decades of careful financial planning. "Philip," Tom said, studying his screen, "I have to ask, how sophisticated is this daughter-in-law? Does she have financial experience?" "She claims to have worked in healthcare, then changed her story to pharmaceutical marketing, then real estate. I'm starting to think all of it was lies." "Has she asked specific questions about your portfolio?" "No direct questions, but she's been fishing for information since the day I met her. Always casual, always friendly, but always probing." Tom frowned. "That sounds like someone with experience in financial investigation. Maybe we should dig a little deeper into her background before we move your assets." "What do you mean?" "I have a contact who does background checks for high net worth clients. Divorce cases, business partnerships, that sort of thing. If Riley has a history of targeting elderly men, we might find a pattern." 3 hours later, Tom called me at home with results that made my blood run cold. "Philip, you need to sit down for this. Riley Elizabeth Morrison isn't her real name. Her birth name is Rachel Ellen Morse, and she's been married 3 times before Patrick." I gripped the phone tighter. 3 times. 3 times to men over 60. All widowers, all financially comfortable. Her first husband, Harold Chen, died of a heart attack 18 months after their marriage. Left her everything, about $400,000. Natural death? According to the death certificate, yes, but here's where it gets interesting. Her second husband, Robert Fairfield, died of complications from pneumonia 2 years after their marriage. Left her his house and about $600,000 in assets. And the third? William Garrett. Married Riley in 2021, died in early 2023. Cause of death listed as accidental overdose of prescription medication. He left her nearly $1.2 million. I felt sick. Accidental overdose? The investigation found that he'd been taking multiple medications for anxiety and depression. Medications that Riley, as his wife and caretaker, was helping him manage. Apparently, there was some confusion about dosages. Jesus Christ. It gets worse, Philip. I found records showing that in each case, Riley had convinced her husband to sign over financial power of attorney within the first few months of marriage. She always cited concerns about their mental health or capacity to manage complex financial decisions. The exact same story she's trying with me. The exact same story. And Philip. Each of these men had reported to friends or family members that they were experiencing memory problems, confusion, or other cognitive issues in the months before they died. I sat in my kitchen chair, staring out the window at my peaceful backyard, trying to process what Tom was telling me. Riley wasn't just a gold digger looking to inherit money eventually. She was systematically murdering wealthy men and stealing their fortunes. Tom, I need copies of everything you found. Already printed. I'm also going to recommend that you contact the police. Not yet. If Riley realizes I'm onto her, she might accelerate her timeline with Patrick. Right now she thinks she's dealing with a confused old man who will eventually sign over control of his modest assets. I need to keep her believing that while I figure out how to save my son. Philip, this woman is dangerous. I know, but Patrick is completely under her spell. If I go to the police now with accusations about 3 previous husbands, he'll think I've lost my mind. She's already convinced him that I'm having cognitive problems. What's your plan? I need to document everything she's doing. Every lie, every manipulation, every false claim about my mental state. I need evidence that will convince Patrick before she can hurt him. That afternoon I drove to the public library and used one of their computers to research Rachel Ellen Morse. The deeper I dug, the more horrifying the pattern became. She would identify wealthy widowers through online obituaries, then research their families and financial situations. She'd position herself to meet them through work, social events, or mutual acquaintances, always appearing as a caring woman looking for genuine companionship. Once married, she'd begin documenting concerning behaviors. She'd hide bills to create evidence of confusion, cancel appointments to suggest memory problems, and gradually isolate her husband from friends and family members who might question her narrative. Then came the power of attorney, the increased control over medications, and finally the convenient death. What terrified me most was how far along this process she'd already gotten with Patrick. The wedding had been rushed, she'd already started the financial questioning, and now she was moving to the legal control phase. According to her pattern, I probably had months, not years, before she decided I was more valuable dead than alive. That evening Patrick called. His voice was strained, worried. Dad, Riley told me about your meeting yesterday. She said you seemed very confused, that you didn't remember some of the things we discussed about your health. Patrick, we've never discussed my health. Dad, please, I know this is hard to accept, but Riley has experience with these things. She's dealt with elderly relatives before. What relatives? A pause. Her grandfather had dementia. She knows the warning signs. Another lie. According to my research, Riley's grandparents had died when she was a child. She'd never been anyone's caregiver. Patrick, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Riley is not who you think she is. Dad, don't start with this paranoia again. Her real name is Rachel Ellen Morse. She's been married 3 times before, not never like she told you. All 3 of her previous husbands died under suspicious circumstances. That's insane, Dad. You're talking like a conspiracy theorist. I have documentation, death certificates, marriage records, financial records showing she inherited significant money from each husband. Dad, you're scaring me. This kind of paranoid thinking. It's exactly what Riley said might happen. The phone went quiet for a long moment. When Patrick spoke again, his voice was careful, like he was talking to someone unstable. Dad, I think you should consider the medical evaluation Riley arranged, just to rule out any physical causes for these thoughts you're having. Patrick, she's using the same pattern with us that she used with 3 other men. She convinces the family that the husband is mentally incompetent, gains control of his finances, then kills him. Dad, stop, just stop. I can't listen to this anymore. He hung up. I sat in my kitchen holding the dead phone, realizing that Riley had played this perfectly. By establishing the narrative of my mental decline first, she'd made it impossible for me to warn Patrick without sounding exactly like the paranoid, confused old man she claimed I was becoming. Any evidence I presented would be dismissed as the delusions of someone with dementia. Any attempt to expose her past would be seen as proof that I was mentally unstable. She'd created a perfect trap where the truth itself became evidence of my supposed illness. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She thought she was dealing with a man who had a few $100,000 in assets and a son who would inherit everything. She had no idea about the $28 million I'd hidden or about the fact that I'd been protecting money from predators since before she was born. Riley Morrison thought she was playing chess with a confused old man. What she didn't realize was that she'd just declared war on someone who'd been playing this game at the master level for longer than she'd been alive. Tomorrow I would start building my counterattack, and this time I wouldn't be playing defense. I spent the next 3 days setting up what I called my confused old man performance. If Riley wanted to believe I was mentally declining, I'd give her exactly what she expected while secretly documenting every move she made. The first step was installing a hidden security system. I hired a company that specialized in discreet surveillance for elderly clients who were concerned about caregiver abuse. Tiny cameras went into my living room, kitchen, and front hall, all connected to a recording system hidden in my basement. Audio recording devices went into my phone and several rooms of the house. "Mr. Phillips," the technician said as he finished the installation, "these recordings will hold up in court if you ever need them. The system automatically saves everything to a secure cloud server, so even if someone destroys the physical equipment, you'll still have the evidence." "Perfect. And nobody can detect these cameras?" "Not unless they're specifically looking for them. To a casual observer, they're invisible." The second step was my performance strategy. I would act slightly more forgetful than usual when Riley was around, but not so much that she'd suspect I was faking. I needed her to feel like her plan was working while giving me time to gather evidence. The third step was protecting Patrick. According to my research into Riley's pattern, she always isolated her husbands from family and friends before making her final move. I needed to document that process as it happened. Riley took the bait faster than I expected. On Thursday morning, she showed up at my door with grocery bags and a bright smile. "Philip, I thought I'd make you lunch today. Patrick mentioned you've been forgetting to eat regularly." I let her in, playing the slightly befuddled character I'd decided to portray. "That's very thoughtful, Riley, but I eat just fine." "I'm sure you do, but sometimes when we're dealing with stress or confusion, our routines get disrupted." She moved into my kitchen like she owned it, unpacking ingredients and setting up to cook. "Patrick is so worried about you. He barely slept last night." "Worried about what?" "Your phone call yesterday, when you started talking about my previous marriages and other strange ideas." "Philip, honey, I've only been married once before, to my college boyfriend. That was over 10 years ago." The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that for a moment I almost questioned my own research. But the cameras were recording, and I had the documentation to prove she was lying. "I could have sworn I read something," I said, letting my voice trail off uncertainly. "Sometimes our minds play tricks on us," she said gently, stirring something on my stove. "It's nothing to be ashamed of. My grandfather went through the same thing before he passed." "Your grandfather?" "He started having these elaborate fantasies about people trying to steal from him. It was heartbreaking, but we got him the help he needed." Another lie. I watched her cook in my kitchen, marveling at how effortlessly she constructed her false narrative. She was building the foundation for having me declared incompetent, one fictional anecdote at a time. "What kind of help?" "Oh, medical evaluation, some medication to help with the anxiety and confusion. A nice facility where he could be properly cared for." She turned to smile at me. "But let's not worry about that now. I'm making your favorite soup." "How do you know what my favorite soup is?" "Patrick told me." "Chicken and dumplings, right?" She was wrong. I hated chicken and dumplings, but I nodded anyway. "That sounds wonderful." Over lunch, she continued probing for information about my finances, but more aggressively than before. "Philip, have you given any thought to the power of attorney documents David Holbrook left? It really would make things easier for everyone." "I'm still considering it. While I'm here, maybe I could help you organize your important papers. Bills, bank statements, insurance policies. Sometimes when our minds are a little foggy, paperwork can pile up and become overwhelming." "That's very kind, but I keep everything organized." "I'm sure you try to, but Patrick mentioned he noticed some bills sitting on your counter for weeks. And didn't you mention having trouble remembering which accounts you use for different expenses?" More lies. My bills were paid automatically, and I'd never discussed my accounts with Patrick. But Riley was building a case for my supposed confusion, creating evidence of problems that didn't exist. "Maybe you could show me your system," she continued. Just so I understand how you like to keep things in case Patrick and I ever need to help in an emergency. What kind of emergency? Oh, if you had a fall or ended up in the hospital. Someone would need to make sure your bills got paid, your insurance was handled, that sort of thing. I showed her my filing cabinet, but only the drawers containing household bills and insurance documents. Nothing about investments or major assets. She spent 20 minutes going through my files, and I could see her frustration growing as she found everything perfectly organized and up to date. You seem to have everything under control here, she admitted reluctantly. I try to stay on top of things. But what about your bank accounts? Do you keep those statements organized too? Just the household checking account. Nothing complicated. What bank do you use? I told her about my local checking account, the one I used for groceries and utilities, the account that held maybe $5,000 on any given day. She made a mental note, probably planning to investigate how much money was really there. After she left, I called Tom Brennan. Tom, she's moving faster than I expected. Today she was in my house, going through my files, asking direct questions about bank accounts. Did she find anything significant? No, but she's building a case for my supposed incompetence. Creating stories about missed bills and confused conversations that never happened. Philip, I've been thinking about this situation and I'm concerned about something else. Have you considered that she might try to harm Patrick if he becomes inconvenient to her plans? The thought hit me like a punch to the stomach. What do you mean? Think about it. She can't inherit anything from you directly. Patrick is your heir. But if something happened to Patrick after she gained control of your assets through that power of attorney, she'd be the surviving spouse of your heir. Depending on how Patrick's will is written, she could end up with everything. Jesus. You think she'd kill Patrick too? I think she's killed 3 men for money and she's not going to let one more life stand between her and $28 million. That afternoon I drove to Patrick's apartment building and waited in the parking lot until he came home from work. When I called out to him, he looked reluctant to talk, but he didn't walk away. Dad, if you're here to talk about Riley again. Patrick, I need you to listen to me about something else. Have you written a will since you got married? He frowned. Actually, yes. Riley suggested we both update our wills since we're married now. She found a lawyer who specializes in estate planning. My heart sank. What lawyer? David Holbrook. The same one who came to see you about the power of attorney. Patrick, what does your new will say? The standard stuff. Everything goes to my spouse if I die, and if we both die, it goes to charity. What charity? Some foundation Riley is involved with. Something about helping elderly people. I felt sick. Riley had already positioned herself to inherit everything if Patrick died. She'd used the same lawyer who was trying to get control of my assets. The trap was even more sophisticated than I'd realized. Son, do you remember when we used to go fishing when you were a kid, out on Lake Candlewood? Of course. What does that have to do with anything? Do you remember what I taught you about fishing? About how to tell when something was trying to steal your bait? Patrick's expression softened slightly. You said to watch the line carefully, that sometimes the fish would nibble around the edges before taking the hook, and if you weren't paying attention, they'd steal everything and swim away. That's right. And what did I tell you to do when you suspected something was stealing your bait? Set the hook hard and fast before they could escape. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and trusting, and realized that his trusting nature was going to get him killed. Patrick, someone is stealing your bait, and if you don't start paying attention to the signs, you're going to lose more than just a fish. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw confusion in his eyes. Not the confusion Riley was claiming I had, but the confusion of someone who was starting to realize that nothing in his life was what it seemed. Dad, what are you really trying to tell me? I'm trying to tell you that your wife is not who she says she is. I'm trying to tell you that you are in danger, and I'm trying to tell you that she's been planning this marriage since before she ever met you. Patrick shook his head. Dad, you're asking me to believe that the woman I love is some kind of criminal mastermind. I'm asking you to believe the evidence, and I'm asking you to be careful about what you eat and drink around her. That got his attention. What do you mean? All 3 of her previous husbands died of medical complications while she was caring for them. Heart attacks, pneumonia complications, accidental overdoses. Always while she was the one managing their medications. Patrick went pale. Dad, you can't be serious. Patrick, when's the last time you felt really well? Have you been tired lately? Confused about things? Having trouble concentrating at work? The color drained from his face completely. How did you know about that? Because it's part of her pattern. She drugs her husbands to make them weak and confused, then claims they have health problems that require her care. It makes the eventual death look natural. Patrick leaned against his car, looking like he might be sick. Dad, this is insane. Riley brings me tea every morning before work. She makes my lunch. She's been so caring. What's in the tea, Patrick? Just tea. With honey. She says it helps with stress. And how do you feel after drinking it? Patrick stared at me, and I could see the pieces clicking into place in his mind. The morning fatigue he'd been attributing to wedding stress. The afternoon brain fog that made it hard to concentrate at work. The way he'd been feeling disconnected from his friends and family. Oh God, he whispered. Oh God, what has she been doing to me? For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. Patrick was finally starting to see the truth, but we were running out of time and Riley was more dangerous than ever. Son, I said quietly, we need to be very, very careful about what happens next. Patrick and I spent the next hour sitting in his car, developing what we called our survival plan. The first rule was that Riley could never suspect we were onto her. The second rule was that we had to gather enough evidence to expose her before she could harm either of us. The third rule was that Patrick had to stop consuming anything Riley prepared for him. But how do I do that without her noticing? Patrick asked, his hands shaking as the full reality of his situation sank in. You have to be smart about it. Pour the tea down the sink when she's not looking. Throw away the lunch and buy something else. Tell her you're trying a new diet or that you've developed food allergies, whatever it takes. Dad, what if she's already done? Permanent damage? What if whatever she's been giving me? We'll deal with that later. Right now we need to focus on keeping you alive and gathering evidence. Patrick pulled out his phone. I should call the police. With what? We have suspicions and some research about her previous marriages, but no proof that she's actually done anything to you. The police will think we're crazy, especially after she's spent weeks telling everyone that I'm mentally incompetent. So, what do? We let her think her plan is working while we document everything. The hidden cameras in my house are already recording her lies. Now we need to catch her in the act of drugging you. How? Save samples of whatever she gives you to drink. Don't consume any of it, but keep portions for testing. If we can prove she's been poisoning you, we'll have grounds for criminal charges. Patrick nodded, looking more focused than I'd seen him in weeks. What about you? If she thinks you're signing over power of attorney, I'm going to string her along, make her think I'm getting more confused and more willing to give up control. But I need you to play along with her story about my mental decline. I can't do that, Dad. I won't help her. You have to, son. If you suddenly start defending my mental capacity, she'll know something has changed. We need her to feel confident that her plan is working. That night, Patrick went home to his wife and pretended everything was normal. I stayed up until 3 in the morning reviewing the audio and video recordings from my security system, studying Riley's techniques and documenting every lie she told. The next morning, Riley called me. Philip, I hope you've had time to think about our conversation yesterday, about the power of attorney documents. I have been thinking about it, I said, letting my voice sound tired and uncertain. And? Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help managing things. It's gotten so complicated. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. Patrick will be so relieved. Could you come over this afternoon? I'd like to go through those papers again. Of course. I'll bring David Holbrook with me just to make sure everything is handled properly. After she hung up, I called Tom Brennan. She's coming back today with the lawyer. I think she believes I'm ready to sign. Are you actually going to sign? I'm going to sign a version that gives her limited access to my household checking account and nothing else. I've had a different lawyer prepare a modified power of attorney that looks identical but only covers about $5,000 in assets. Brilliant. She'll think she has control while you maintain access to everything that matters. Exactly. And once I sign, she'll probably accelerate her timeline. Patrick and I need to be ready. That afternoon, Riley arrived with Holbrook and an attitude of barely concealed triumph. She dressed professionally again, but there was something different in her demeanor. More confident, more aggressive. "Philip, I'm so proud of you for making this decision," she said, settling into my living room like she belonged there. "This is going to make everything so much easier for everyone." Holbrook spread the documents across my coffee table. "These are the same papers we discussed last week, Mr. Phillips. Nothing has changed." But I was looking at different papers. The ones my lawyer had prepared looked identical to the originals, but contained crucial limitations that wouldn't be obvious unless someone read every line carefully. "This gives Patrick and Riley the ability to help with your banking, your bills, your medical decisions," Holbrook continued. "Very standard protections for someone in your situation." I pretended to study the documents carefully, occasionally asking questions that made me sound confused about basic financial concepts. Riley watched me with hawk-like intensity, probably calculating how much money she thought she was about to control. "The house is paid off, isn't it, Philip?" she asked casually. "Yes, no mortgage." "And your main bank account is at First National?" "That's right." "What about investments? Retirement accounts, that sort of thing?" I looked at her with what I hoped appeared to be mild confusion. "I have a small savings account, maybe $20,000 or so, and some old bonds that probably aren't worth much anymore." Riley's eyes lit up. $20,000 in savings plus a house worth $600,000 was more than enough to justify her effort, especially if she thought I might have hidden assets she could discover later. "Well, that's all very manageable," she said smoothly. "Nothing too complicated for Patrick and me to help with." I signed the fake power of attorney with a slightly shaky hand, playing the part of an elderly man reluctantly giving up control of his affairs. Holbrook witnessed the signature and gathered his copies. "This was the right decision, Philip," Riley said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You don't need to worry about anything anymore. Patrick and I will take care of everything." The way she said everything made my skin crawl. After they left, I immediately called Patrick. "It's done. She thinks she has control of my finances." How long before she realizes the truth? Probably not until she tries to access something significant. The account she can access has about $5,000. That might satisfy her for a while, but eventually she'll want more. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Last night, Riley was on the phone with someone after she thought I was asleep. I couldn't hear everything, but she mentioned something about accelerating the timeline." My blood went cold. "What else did you hear?" "Something about not waiting as long as usual because the situation was more complicated than her previous cases. Dad, I think she's planning to move against both of us soon." "Have you been avoiding the tea and food?" "Yes, but it's getting harder. She's starting to ask why I'm not eating what she prepares. This morning she insisted on watching me drink the tea." "What did you do?" "I pretended to drink it, but only took tiny sips. Then I told her I was feeling sick and ran to the bathroom. I spit out what I could and flushed the rest down the toilet." "Good thinking. But Patrick, if she's getting suspicious..." "I know. Dad, I saved some of yesterday's tea in a small bottle. I want to have it tested." "Do that immediately." "And Patrick? I think you should consider staying somewhere else tonight." "I can't just leave. She'll know something's wrong." "Then be very, very careful about what you consume, and keep your phone with you at all times." That evening, I was reviewing my security footage when something made me freeze. Around 4 o'clock, after Riley and the lawyer had left, someone had entered my backyard. The cameras showed a figure in dark clothing moving around the perimeter of my house, checking windows and doors. The person was too far away to identify clearly, but the build and movement looked like Riley. She'd come back to case my house, probably planning some kind of break-in or emergency that would require her to take immediate control of my affairs. I called Patrick immediately. "She's planning something for tonight. I have footage of someone checking my house this afternoon." "Dad, you need to get out of there." "No, If I disappear, she'll know we're onto her. But I'm going to be ready for whatever she's planning. I spent the evening preparing. I moved my most important documents to a safe deposit box. I made sure my security system was recording everything. I put a baseball bat beside my bed and my cell phone on speed dial to 911. At 2:15 in the morning, I heard the sound of breaking glass from my kitchen. I lay perfectly still, listening as footsteps moved through my house. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was down there could hear it. The footsteps came up the stairs, slowly, carefully. My bedroom door opened with the softest creak. In the dim light from my alarm clock, I could see Riley's silhouette in the doorway. She was holding something in her hand, a syringe. She moved toward my bed with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Someone who was absolutely certain that her victim was helpless and unaware. I waited until she was close enough, then I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. Riley froze, the syringe still in her hand, her eyes wide with shock and calculation. "Hello, Rachel," I said quietly. "Or do you prefer Riley?" For a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly, Riley's shocked expression melted into something cold and predatory. "You clever old bastard," she said, her voice completely different now. Gone was the sweet, concerned daughter-in-law. This was the real Riley, the woman who'd killed 3 men and was about to kill a 4th. "Put the syringe down, Riley." She laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. "I don't think so, Philip. You've caused me a lot of trouble, but nothing I can't handle. The house is wired with cameras. Everything you've done tonight is being recorded. Then I guess I'll have to destroy the recordings along with everything else." She took a step closer. "You know, my original plan was to let you live a little longer. Milk the power of attorney for a few months, then arrange a nice, peaceful death. But you just couldn't leave well enough alone. What's in the syringe? Insulin. Lots of insulin. You'll go into diabetic shock and die peacefully in your sleep. Very sad, very natural for a man your age." "And Patrick?" "Patrick will be devastated by his father's sudden death. So devastated that he'll need extra medication to cope with the grief. Sometimes people accidentally take too much when they're not thinking clearly." The casual way she described murdering my son made something snap inside me. This woman had been in my house, eating my food, pretending to care about my family while planning to kill both of us for money. "You made one mistake, Riley." "What's that?" "You assumed I was just another helpless old man?" I lunged forward and grabbed her wrist, twisting hard until she dropped the syringe. Riley was strong, but I was desperate. And desperation gave me strength I didn't know I still had. We struggled for several seconds before I managed to pin her arm behind her back and force her face down on the floor. She was cursing and threatening me, but I was already reaching for my phone. 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Philip Phillips at 1247 Maple Street. I have an intruder in my house who just tried to inject me with something. I have her restrained, but I need police and paramedics immediately." Riley stopped struggling. "You have no proof of anything," she hissed. "It's the word of a confused old man against a concerned family member." I smiled grimly. "Actually, Rachel Ellen Morse, I have about 6 hours of recorded footage of you breaking into my house and attempting murder, plus audio recordings of you confessing to killing your previous husbands." For the first time since I'd met her, Riley looked genuinely afraid. The police arrived 12 minutes later, followed by paramedics and, eventually, Patrick. As they took Riley away in handcuffs, she was still claiming that I was mentally incompetent and that everything had been a misunderstanding. But the recordings didn't lie, and when the syringe tested positive for enough insulin to kill a horse, Riley's claims of innocence became impossible to sustain. Standing in my driveway at 4 in the morning, watching the police cars disappear into the darkness, Patrick put his arm around my shoulders. "Dad, how did you know to be ready for her?" "Son, when you've been protecting money as long as I have, you learn to recognize predators from a mile away." "About that money. How much are we actually talking about?" I looked at my boy, my son who'd almost died because a monster had chosen our family as her hunting ground. "Patrick," I said, "I think it's time we had a very long conversation." 3 months later, Patrick and I sat in Tom Brennan's office for what he'd called the financial disclosure meeting. Riley, or Rachel as we now knew her real name, was awaiting trial for attempted murder, conspiracy and fraud. The investigation into her previous husband's deaths had been reopened, and prosecutors were confident they had enough evidence to put her away for life. Patrick had recovered from whatever she'd been poisoning him with, though it had taken weeks of medical testing to confirm that no permanent damage had been done. The doctor said he'd been receiving small doses of a combination of sedatives and anti-anxiety medications that had kept him in a constant state of mental fog. The scariest part, Patrick had told me, is how normal it felt while it was happening. I just thought I was stressed from the wedding and adjusting to married life. I never suspected that someone was drugging me. Now sitting across from Tom's mahogany desk, Patrick was about to learn the truth about what Riley had really been after. "Patrick," Tom began, "your father has asked me to explain the full scope of his financial situation. What I'm about to tell you may come as quite a shock." Patrick looked at me, then back at Tom. "How much of a shock?" "Your father is worth approximately $28 million. Patrick's face went completely blank. "I'm sorry, what?" $28 million, Tom repeated. "Accumulated over 40 years of careful investing, smart financial planning, and extremely disciplined saving." Patrick turned to stare at me. "Dad, you've been driving a 5-year-old Honda and shopping with coupons. Appearances matter, son. The more people think you have, the more they want to take from you. I learned that lesson the hard way after your mother died." Tom pulled out a thick folder and began spreading documents across his desk. "Your father's assets are currently divided among several investment accounts, real estate holdings, and a diversified stock portfolio. Everything has been managed conservatively with a focus on long-term growth and protection from exactly the kind of predator who targeted your family." Patrick picked up one of the bank statements, studying the numbers like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Dad, this account alone has more money than I make in 10 years. "And that's one of the smaller ones," I said. "Why didn't you tell me? All these years I've been worried about you living on a fixed income, managing on Social Security." "Because I needed you to see me as a regular person, not as a source of money. I wanted our relationship to be genuine, based on love and family, not on what you might inherit someday." Patrick set down the bank statement and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Dad, Riley almost killed both of us for money you didn't even need to hide. We could have just told her you were broke." "Son, if I'd been genuinely broke, Riley never would have targeted our family in the first place. She researched potential victims carefully. She knew I owned my house outright, lived comfortably, and had raised a successful son. Those were the signs of hidden wealth, even if she couldn't prove it." Tom leaned forward. "Your father's instinct to hide his assets probably saved both your lives. If Riley had known the real numbers, she might have been more desperate and moved much faster." "So, what happens now?" Patrick asked. I'd been thinking about that question for months. "Now we decide what to do with it. I'm 63 years old, Patrick. I have more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes. The question is what kind of legacy I want to leave." "What do you mean?" "I mean that money sitting in accounts doesn't help anyone. Your mother always said that wealth without purpose is just numbers on paper." Tom pulled out another set of documents. "Your father has asked me to research some options for putting his wealth to work in meaningful ways." "What kind of options?" "Foundations that help elderly people avoid financial fraud. Educational programs that teach people how to recognize and escape from abusive relationships. Legal aid funds that help victims of domestic violence get the resources they need to start over safely." Patrick was quiet for a long moment, absorbing everything he was hearing. "Dad, you want to give away $28 million? "Not all of it. I want to give away most of it, to people who need it more than we do." "But what about my inheritance? What about your retirement?" I smiled. "Son, I could live comfortably for the rest of my life on just the interest from $5 million. And you'll still inherit more money than most people see in a lifetime. The question is whether we keep it all for ourselves or use it to help other people avoid what we just went through." Patrick looked around Tom's office at the expensive furniture and the degrees on the wall, then back at me. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Were you happy? All these years having all this money but living like you didn't?" It was a fair question, and one I'd asked myself many times over the years. "Happy is complicated, Patrick. Was I happy having financial security? Absolutely. Was I happy knowing I could handle any emergency, pay for any medical treatment, help you if you ever needed it? Yes. But I was also constantly worried about protecting it, constantly suspicious of people's motives, constantly performing this character of a modest retiree instead of being myself. And now? Now I want to use it for something bigger than just protecting myself. Tom interjected, Patrick, we're not talking about making these decisions immediately. This is a conversation that could take months or even years, but your father wanted you to understand the full scope of what's available. Patrick picked up another bank statement, this one showing an account balance of over $4 million. Dad, I need to ask you something else. Go ahead. If you'd told me the truth from the beginning, if I'd known how much money was involved, would I have been able to see through Riley's act? I thought about that. I don't know, son. Money makes people act differently. It makes them suspicious of everyone's motives, including their own families. Look at how you're feeling right now, learning about all this. How am I feeling? Overwhelmed. Confused about what's real and what isn't. Wondering if other people in your life know about the money and have hidden motives. Patrick nodded slowly. You're right. I am wondering about that. That's why I kept it secret. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want money to poison your relationships the way it had mine. But it almost got us killed. Yes, it did. And I'll have to live with that responsibility for the rest of my life. We spent the next 2 hours going through the details of my financial situation. Patrick asked thoughtful questions about investment strategies, tax implications, and legal protections. By the end of the meeting, he seemed more comfortable with the information, though still somewhat stunned by the scope of it all. Driving home in my Honda, which I decided to keep despite Patrick's suggestion that I could afford something better, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret was finally out. The money was no longer a burden I carried alone. Dad, Patrick said as we pulled into my driveway, I want you to know something. What's that? I'm proud of you, not for having the money, but for what you did with it, for protecting it, for protecting us, for being smart enough to see through Riley when I couldn't. Thank you, son. And I want to help you figure out how to give it away. If we're going to do something meaningful with this wealth, I want to be part of that decision. I looked at my son, this man who'd almost died because a predator had targeted our family, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace about my financial situation. Patrick, there's something else we need to discuss. What? Your divorce from Riley. Given what we know about her, and given what we now know about my assets, we need to make sure she can never make any claim to this money, no matter what happens with the criminal trial. Already handled, Patrick said with a grin. My lawyer filed papers last week. Fraud and attempted murder are pretty solid grounds for voiding a marriage. Good thinking. I learned from the best. 6 months later, Patrick and I established the Martha Phillips Foundation for Financial Safety, named after my late wife who'd been victimized by predators herself. The foundation provides legal aid, education, and support for elderly people who are targeted by financial predators. Riley was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The investigation into her previous husband's deaths resulted in 3 additional murder convictions. She would never hurt another family. I kept $5 million for myself, which generates enough income to live very comfortably for the rest of my life. Patrick inherited another $5 million immediately, with the understanding that the remaining $18 million would be distributed through the foundation over the next 20 years. On the first anniversary of Riley's arrest, Patrick and I were sitting in my kitchen, sharing a pot of coffee I'd made myself, when he asked me a question that made me smile. Dad, do you ever regret keeping the money secret for so long? I thought about the question while I sipped my coffee. You know, son, I spent 40 years protecting money from people who wanted to steal it. But the thing I learned from this whole experience is that money can't protect you from people who want to hurt you. Only family can do that. And the money was never what mattered. What mattered was that when Riley tried to destroy our family, we chose to trust each other instead of trusting her. We chose to fight for each other instead of fighting over money. Patrick raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To fighting for each other. To fighting for each other, I agreed. Outside my kitchen window, I could see the garden that Martha had planted 30 years ago, still blooming every spring despite the fact that she was gone. Some things endure not because they are protected, but because they are nurtured by love. The money would eventually be gone, distributed to people who needed it more than we did. But the family Patrick and I had rebuilt from the wreckage of Riley's betrayal, that would last forever. And for the first time in 20 years, I was sleeping through the night without worrying about protecting anything except the people I loved.